Well, now's the time when you may be thinking of moving your indoor plants outdoors for a summer vacation, but you aren't going to want to put them out in a really sunny spot just right away. You're going to want to do it in stages and kind of acclimatize those plants to being outdoors. When you first move your plants outdoors, you're going to want to put them in a spot where it's pretty much shady all day, but it's still usually brighter than what they had inside. And this spot here under our arbor is a great spot to get our plants started out because they're protected from the wind and they don't get that full brunt of the sun. Now, as they start to acclimatize, like say in another week, you could maybe move them to a spot where they would get some morning sun, but not afternoon sun. But one thing to remember is a lot of plants that are made for indoors, they're usually tropical. They're used to being in the understory of a tropical rainforest or something like that. And so they're not something that's going to take full sun no matter how long you acclimatize them. So be careful where you position your plants. Watch and make sure they're not getting sunburned. Well, it's also a good time of year to pot up your plants into bigger pots if you think they're root bound. And I think both of these we need to take a look and see if they need to be potted up. First off, how do you know when your plant needs to be repotted? One way that you can tell is if they're drying out rapidly and you're watering them all the time, then they probably need potted up. And it's a good idea to do this before you move them outside because naturally they're going to take more water outside. Now this Schefflera, if we turn it out of the pot, you'll notice how it's root bound and the roots are starting to circle the bottom of the pot. So there's more root mass here than there probably is soil to hold water. And that's an indicator that we need to pot it up. Well, we need to pot this up into a larger pot, but how big do we go? Well, you might think, oh, I don't want to do that very often, so I'll take a huge pot like this and put it in there and it'll have a lot of room. Well, actually, most houseplants like to be slightly root bound, and so you shouldn't go up too many sizes in a pot. And one of the best rules of thumb is to go up just 1 more inch in diameter in your pot size. And here I've got one that looks about right for the Schefflera. Now when you're choosing pots, you can either go with the plastic or you can go with the clay pots here. And it's usually a matter of personal preference. Now the plastic pots won't dry out as fast, but there's also not as good air circulation in there, so you can overwater these and you can also get some root rot going. But the nice thing about plastic pots is they are much lighter than a big clay pot, especially when they get into large sizes. Now I've got my plant in here, and this basically is a very healthy Schefflera, so I just put it right in there. Now I've got that all potted up, it's ready to go. I just need to water it in. Now when you move your plants outside, you want to fertilize them more because they are going to be growing. But wait a couple of weeks after you transplant them into a larger pot. Let those roots get reestablished and then start feeding them with a soluble fertilizer. Well, this Aglaonema over here needs a little bit of trimming, so you can trim off the dead leaves here. And also, if I'm putting this outside and the wind's going to be blowing, this is a tall plant and it seems a little bit unstable, so I may want to put a stake in here and tie it to that. Now let's take a look at these roots and see if this one needs potted up too. And one of the best ways to do is just to take your plant, turn it upside down while you're holding the root ball, and then take it out. Well, you'll notice here, this one again needs to be potted up in a larger pot. But I can also do something else before I pot this up, and that is do a little bit of root pruning here. Basically, to prune roots, just take and clip off some of these roots, especially if they're really large. See how these roots here are starting to circle around? I want to clip through there, take off some of those lower ones. That'll give it a little bit more space and get it started. And then I can take some of these other roots and kind of spread them out like that. Now this one, I've got a larger pot here. And again, just as I did with the other one, fill it with the well-drained potting soil. Place in there and then just fill in. Again, water it in, and in a couple weeks, start fertilizing it. We've got one more plant here, and it's a real monster plant. And let's take a look at it. Well, this monster plant I was telling you about is an asparagus fern. And it doesn't look really big on top right now, but you'll see in a minute what I'm talking about. Now, asparagus ferns are one of my favorite ferns because they actually take a lot of abuse. A lot of people don't like them because they tend to drop their foliage, and that's actually one of the ways that it deals with water stress, by getting rid of that extra foliage. Well, there's another way that it deals with water stress, and it's really quite interesting. Now, as I pull this out of the pot, you can tell that it really needs to be repotted. But if you look, it's got another really neat way to deal with water stress. And you look here, as we see all of the roots in here, you can see these little nodules. And if I cut one of these out, it's really quite interesting that cutting it in half, it's pretty much filled with water. And this is how an asparagus fern stores up water for times of drought stress. Well, I could get an inch larger pot and pot this up, which I have been doing for 10 years now. But as you can see, it's a little bit heavy, and I'm kind of tired of lugging this back and forth. So I'm actually going to divide this. I'm going to get my saw out and divide my fern so that I can have two. Now, this is a part where people tend to be a little bit worried about using a saw on their plants, but this is actually very good for it. Okay. Now, I've got two ferns, and if I just do a little bit of this spreading of the roots, and you can actually be pretty rough on these, they'll come back. And again, this was in this pot for a year, and you can see how much it grew. Now I can use a slightly smaller pot and pot this section up in this pot and just fill in here. And the other half I'll stick back in my other pot after I clean it out. And now I'll have two ferns to set on my front porch instead of just one.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.